on join us and couldn't. We're now here in the right place. So, a very warm welcome to today's webinar with the Live Well Live webinar with the Lifestyle Medicine team. And we're joined today by Dr. Megha Pankoli, who will say hello in a minute and let us know all about her and why she's joining us today. We're going to be talking all about emotional eating today. But before we get started, just to let you know, if you have brought any questions along, please do pop them into the Q&A box. If you have questions during the webinar, do pop them into the Q&A box or into the chat box, but we try and find them as much as possible in the Q&A box. And just for the purposes, if anything sits outside of what we can safely talk about in a webinar, we will redirect you to the right people as far as we possibly can. Obviously, we want to make sure you get the best advice that's available to you in a safe way. So if there's something that comes up that we can't safely answer in the purposes of the webinar, we'll redirect you. So please feel free to ask. We're also joined today by Julia, who's going to be sharing links with us, which is very helpful. So thank you to that. And also just to let you know that our marketing team are asking if anybody would be interested in being featured in Real Stories. So they're looking for anybody who's interested to being featured in Real Stories from the Boots Online Doctor, to inspire others and show how our service can help support people on their weight loss and health journeys. If you're interested in being involved, we have an email that for the marketing team that we will share with you in the chat box. So Julia, I think you should have that email. So if you could share that in the chat box, that would be amazing. And we're very keen to hear from people. We're very keen to showcase how amazing the support is that hopefully we're giving you, and also, to hear from you, really. So let's get started. Megha, do say hello and introduce yourself.
Hi, so thanks, Ruth, for inviting me back again. We did this webinar 6 months ago, and it was a pleasure to be asked back. So my name is Dr. Megha Pankoli. I'm a GP, been a GP for 11 years now, working both in NHS practice as well as private practice. I'm working for Boots Online Doctor at the moment. I'm part of the lead GPs for the mental health service with Boots Online Doctor, and I've got a particular interest in emotional eating and weight loss and sort of the mental health side around that. That's why I've been asked to join today, so I'm really looking forward to it.
Yes, very much. So let's talk about. I can see that there's somebody asking a question in the chat box, so we'll pick up on that towards the end of the slides. So do feel free to let us know what's going on for you, and we'll do our best to support you. So let's talk a little bit about emotional eating. I'm sure that, we were talking about this earlier, weren't we, Megha? And what we know is that for most people, at some point in their lives, it's very likely that there may be a spell where they've been sort of more emotionally connected to food for whatever reason. And that emotional attachment can happen for a variety of reasons. It's sort of being really more closely recognised that mental and emotional health play a significant role in the development of being overweight or being obese. And it's not just about what we eat, it's not just about our exercise habits. Emotional regulation is a big part of our food journey. So for some people, struggles with managing emotions and experiencing a lot of negative emotions can make obesity worse or longer lasting. And this is why we think it's such an important subject for us to be talking about here, because it's not really talked about very much in the mainstream. So people who have maybe difficulty regulating their emotions, for example, maybe calming down when they're upset or handling stress or negative emotions, can really lean into being a bit more of an emotional eater. And that simply means that they may eat more when they're feeling that surge of emotions. It might be the thing that makes them feel a little bit better in the moment. And it can just become a sort of routine coping mechanism. So negative emotions like depression, anxiety, stress, loneliness, for many people can trigger that sort of unhealthy emotional eating. And we will see this as maybe an occasional binge eating, emotional eating, or maybe even avoiding physical activity when you're just feeling really overwhelmed. So this is so important, isn't it, Megha? So Is that your understanding and experience of it, Mega? Is that how you would describe it?
I think so. And I think it's hopefully the more we talk about it today, we can make it common that you're not alone. This is more common than you think. And I
Mm.
think if one thing from today's webinar is to take any shame or stigma away from it, increase awareness, and just allow people to understand that all of us at some point in our lives have had some sort of emotional attachment to food, or if we're going through a particularly stressful time or period in life, food is there for us. And I think, I mean, I talk about it later on in the talk, but there is a scientific reason why your body craves such foods to get that dopamine hit. But this particular moment, we're going to sort of just talk a little bit about emotional and physical hunger. I think it's easier sometimes when we're thinking rationally, oh yeah, we know the difference, but it is an important distinction. But one that sort of a lot of us maybe haven't been taught to recognize. And so in terms of emotional hunger, sort of give you paint a picture. So this kind of comes on suddenly. So it's like you're going about your day and then it's like a switch being flipped. So you might be feeling fine and then all of a sudden you're like, I really need to, I'm really craving some chocolate, I'm really craving pizza or whatever the food may be. And it's not like, oh, hang on, I'm feeling hungry. It's lunchtime. It's like I need to have something now. So it's that sudden onset. In terms of craving specific comfort foods, that can be individual to the patient, but we know that sort of sweet foods, high carb foods, comfort foods, as we call them, tend to be sort of things that people tend to want. Urgent, as I mentioned, comes on all of a sudden, unrelated to the last meal. So we do find patients can say that, oh, I've just had breakfast or I've just had a meal and I know I'm not hungry. But this all of a sudden emotional hunger comes on. Um, and I'm going to talk about the guilt a little bit at the end, but sort of mainly to guilt. So that feeling around, well, maybe I shouldn't have had that, or should I have that? I didn't really need that, is more associated with emotional hunger. Physical hunger, on the opposite side, it builds up more gradually, as in it's more of a feeling that, oh, my stomach's grumbling, I feel like I need to eat, haven't had breakfast, it's meal time. But it's something that patients say that you can kind of put off. You know that, okay, I'm going to need to eat soon, and you wait until appropriate time. Patients can be patient around it. Open to a variety of foods. So um, we do sometimes see this being mentioned, and without sounding patronizing, you kind of do think, if I was to have, say, plain chicken and broccoli, would that be okay right now? Or do I need to have like this chocolate cake or pasta or something a bit more indulgent? But that kind of is a good distinction to have in the mind and be like, take a moment to pause and say, is this physical hunger or emotional hunger? And then satisfied without guilt. So again, there's that emotional element tends to be missing there with the physical hunger because you're hungry, you've eaten something, you're done. And just again to finish off, and we keep going back to getting rid of this shame. There's no shame in emotional eating, as we said. It's a coping strategy which, as Ruth mentioned, can be there from childhood, especially if you haven't been taught about the distinction between physical hunger, emotional hunger, or you haven't had a moment where you've just taken that time out and be like, am I actually hungry or is this something else? Am I dysregulated? Am I trying to feed or fill a different kind of hole? So these are just some very sort of high level thoughts on this.
Yeah, and I guess from that childhood perspective, could it be that as a child you learned to soothe your emotions with food or a sweet treat or,
Absolutely.
some
And
sort
it's,
of
and it's
like,
that kind of goes back to specific comfort foods. I've certainly had patients tell me that they want a specific type of food that they know they had during childhood. And if you
mm,
think about sort of kids' party food, it tends to be quite sugary and carby as well. So, it's something that people associate. I keep saying patients, so that's my experience, but people associate with feeling safe, feeling comforted. Um, and that's definitely we see that a lot as a learned behavior rather than something that just happens in adulthood.
yeah, I think it can creep in
Yeah.
and it can creep in so under the radar. You might not even have thought to yourself, is this something that's relevant for me? We don't talk about it. Many people that we see who are in that weight loss journey have been on the weight loss journey before. They've maybe recycled and put the weight back on and they're back here again. And it can be that that is maybe one of the reasons, can be this whole emotional eating. Perhaps that's something that really gets in your way and
Mm,
sabotages you. And I
mm,
think this is really important. In short, anyone, really anyone, it can be any age group, any gender, any background. It's often associated with people who've had some trauma in their lives or a lot of stress, or maybe have ongoing chronic levels of stress. It might be that you've never learnt some level of emotional regulation. So it may be that actually you're quite a volatile person, your emotional regulation isn't great. You sort of fly off the handle a little bit more, or you become very low in mood and you don't know how to manage it. I'm not suggesting you're all of these things, but you might notice patterns of behavior. You might find that you are very easily very low in mood or suffer with anxiety, and these sort of like food can be a soothing mechanism in all of those situations. And it's often something that we find really is not unusual in people who've had to really go back on this whole weight loss cycle several times in a row, that they find it really difficult to maintain that weight management. We know weight loss maintenance is quite tricky. Anyway, we know that hunger is a big factor in weight loss maintenance. So we're not talking about that specifically, but if you're somebody who's regained significant amounts of weight and then gone back on that diet, this may be something to think about. Is this relevant to you? Or maybe for people who aren't happy in their skin, not happy with their bodies, these are the type of people who may be experiencing, or maybe emotional eating is part of your picture. And you've never really had that conversation before. Nobody's ever talked about it. I don't think we talk about it enough. And it almost brings that element of shame just because it's not spoken about, which is incredibly wrong, isn't it? If we don't talk about things and people don't realize that several people in the room are experiencing this too, you can feel very isolated, can't you?
100%. And I think identification is the key.
Yeah,
And just having that moment, and as you said, identifying that, hang on, something's up here. And that's the key here.
yeah. So,
Is
Megan,
this me?
what are those signs?
Yes.
Yeah, go for it.
So just to sort of bring it back to sort of clinical, how would somebody sort of identify things? What do we want you to look out for? What do patients come in with where we're like, hang on, this is something that could be something else? So emotional eating, repeated weight gain after successful loss. Um, Now we have a lot of webinars, a lot of resources and clinical information about, the mechanics of losing weight. But once you've lost the weight regain, is that usually a sign of, is there something going on? Is there emotional dysregulation, which allows a patient to not successfully sort of manage the sort of emotional eating and their eating patterns? And despite knowing that they've lost this weight successfully by looking at their diet, increasing the exercise, that emotional side or emotional regulation that we're talking about has not been looked at, and therefore the eating behaviors have not been looked at, and therefore patient comes in with repeated weight gain in this yo-yo pattern. That kind of links on to difficulty losing weight consistently. Now, when we're talking about consistency, weight loss isn't a start and then an end, and that's it. We all have lives, we have jobs that change, we have um, stresses, children issues, jobs issues, relationship issues. And so these all bring on stresses, and therefore something happens that takes you off track and you're not able to get back on track again because you kind of get lost in that cycle that I'm going to talk about a little bit later. Frequently feeling overly full. So if we go back to what I mentioned about physical hunger, emotional hunger, when I mentioned about the emotional hunger, it's not really related to when you've last eaten or timing of the day. It is more of an emotional hole. So, you kind of feeding to feel a hole, and that you kind of sometimes may overeat or eat to a point where you're feeling kind of overly full and not really satiated in a way. No appetite for real or nutritious food. Again, you might crave a certain type of comfort food, a certain type of food that you want to eat. And again, going back to that typical example that sort of personal trainers or people tend to use, would you want to eat an apple or would you want to eat some chicken breast and broccoli, or are you eating something else? I'm not saying that that's always a sign, because there are times when I don't even want to eat chicken and broccoli for dinner. I know I should have, but it's just something to think about. Um, and then using food to manage emotional crisis. I think this is what we've been talking about in terms of coping strategies. Whether this is a learned behavior and this is just how you've done it already. Quite commonly, people are like, oh, I need to have X, Y, Z or whatever, and then I'll feel better. And it's the identification that you're doing this, which is key, and not having the shame around it and being open to, okay, I've identified something. This is something that maybe I need to get help for to help me be successful in losing my weight, but also maintaining my weight and a better mental health as well. Is there anything else you want to add here, Ruth?
No, I think that's really important. But there's a question in the chat which I think is really relevant to bring in here. And
Mhm.
somebody's asking, surely craving and emotional hunger are different. So that's a really interesting question. And I think it is relevant to pick that up now. It's sort of like, I think emotional hunger is, well, a craving for a certain food is not hunger. So that's the interesting thing. If you're constantly craving a specific food, there may be a reason for that. And quite often it's an emotional reason that you're craving that specific food. And exactly what you were saying just now, Mega, isn't it? Is that when we're craving something, it's often those comfort foods, the sugary foods. Not many people that I've spoken to crave apples, although I was speaking to somebody who's pregnant the other day and she's definitely craving oranges. So, but that's completely different, isn't it? But I think having an emotional connection to food and craving something that isn't necessarily healthy food may be an element of an emotional aspect to that. Doesn't mean to say that you have an emotional eating issue that is regular and ongoing. We're talking here about people who are experiencing these issues quite regularly, that they may be finding that they're not able, for whatever reason, to maintain a healthy weight, that they find that they achieve that healthy weight through whichever process they follow, a weight loss program or a healthy eating program, but they can't sustain it. Is there an element of emotional eating here? This is not, everyone here is not necessarily going to be experiencing emotional eating, but we know that this is far more common than is spoken about in normal life.
You
Yeah.
hit the nail on the head there in terms of it's not like a blanket. We're obviously talking at a very high level, but I mean, we all crave, like, oh, I need chocolate. These foods are delicious and they're there to be enjoyed, but it's the sort of dopamine hit that when we're talking about emotional eating, as I said, there's a reason why patients crave a certain type of food. You do get a dopamine hit in terms of when you are looking for emotional regulation. And it's when it becomes, as you said, more frequent and it becomes like every single time X happens, then Y happens. So perfect. Let's start talking about the emotional cycle. So when I talk about learned behavior or what happens, it can be useful to think about what happens. So emotional trigger, which is just there, whatever that may be, we all have those. Something happens which leads to a craving, as you mentioned. Oh my God, I'm so stressed. Somebody at work said XYZ. I just need to go home and like have a pack of biscuits and just like sit on the sofa and do nothing. So that's like the ritual. So what we mean by ritual is this learned behavior that happens that every time a person is emotionally dysregulated for whatever reason, that's what they use to sort of help with their emotional regulation. And so once you do that, there's a reward system. There is a dopamine hit, there's serotonin hit. You feel good and happy and calm for a moment. However, with the emotional eating, guilt follows. So, oh, I shouldn't have done that. I feel really bad. That's really unhealthy. Why did I do it again? I shouldn't have done this. I said last time was the last time. And then that again causes patients to feel stressed and really bad about themselves and it kind of triggers the cycle again. Um, and I think most people can identify with this at some different stages of their lives. But what we want to do is the identification of each stage of the cycle and hopefully using, the emotional triggers. I mean, life is life, right? We're all going to have emotional triggers in terms of the craving will be there and the ritual. Where can we step in and be like, okay, let's identify this. Something has happened. I'm feeling uneasy. I'm not feeling right. And I normally would go and do this type of learned eating behavior. However, I've identified this, I'm going to do something else. Now, that may not be the case all the time, but if you can identify it and try to change it, that's what we're hopefully um, going to sort of help with and identify that today to try and break this cycle and make patients more successful in their sort of weight loss journey. Anything else you want to add here, June?
No, I think it is that vicious cycle, isn't it? It sort of like becomes a never-ending repeat pattern that you might not really have even thought about. I think it's only when I did some additional training around eating and eating behavior that it really grabbed my attention that this just doesn't come into our conversations. All of those dieting clubs that many people go through.
Yeah.
These
Everybody talks about,
conversations
sorry
don't.
to talk, I just want to, just a quick point. With weight loss, the focus is always, not always, but majority of time, the number, how much have you lost, and your clothing size. So um, this is why we want to talk about this today.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just about recognizing if this may be relevant to you, maybe something that you don't feel is relevant to you. That's absolutely fine. We don't suspect for 1 minute that everyone who's here today, this is going to be the story for you. But we also suspect that for some people, this will very likely be part of your story. And this is why it's important to talk about. There's no point in us ignoring that for many people, emotional eating might be the thing that's tripping them up. So, how are we going to move out of this loop? I think you've already alluded to what you need to do. You need to be thinking, okay, you need to catch the behavior, I think. You need to catch yourself in that cycle. And maybe just even the first step for anyone in this situation is actually just that recognition that perhaps one of the reasons that you're finding it really difficult either to lose weight in the first place or to maintain your weight loss when you've successfully achieved your goal is that because there's an element of emotional eating in your world, in for you, that is perhaps the trip, your tripper upper, the thing that gets in your way, the bit that sabotages you, that you don't have absolute control of at this point in time. But just because you don't have control of it doesn't mean to say you'll never have control of it. And I guess that's the whole key point here is we can relearn our behavior. We need to let go of that self-blame. We need to stop feeling bad about ourselves because that's just going to reinforce, isn't it, Mega? That will just reinforce that sort of negative cycle. It will reinforce that need to feel better about ourselves. So we have that food thing that gives us that lift, and the cycle just wows on and goes on and on and on. So stop all of the blame. Stop overthinking it. Stop judging yourself. I think let's just get rid of all of that negative language. Just see it as a pattern. We get into habits. Some of them are good, some of them less good. That's life. You said it yourself. We're all living this life.
And guilt is usually, you find that, I mean, self-compassion, all these things. Sometimes it sounds a bit like, oh, it's easier said than done, but you see it all the time. And I mean, even in personally, that guilt that's associated, usually you find in patients, it prompts the next episode
Yeah.
rather than sort of breaking the cycle. And
Guilt is
so
part of that negative
compassion.
cycle, isn't it?
Mm,
Because if you start feeling down on yourself and you almost like then start believing that you're never going to move forward, you're never going to achieve this, you're never going to be where you want to be, it just
mm,
creates that really horrible spirally loop. So
mm.
the thing, stop blaming yourself. And, it is just a fact and part and parcel of many people's journeys. It's okay. Let it go. Let that guilt go. Stop blaming yourself. And then catch yourself. Sort of start thinking, okay, if I'm an emotional eater, what could I do instead next time I have that urge to eat something that I really didn't want to do or I didn't want to have? What could I do instead? Could I go outside and get some fresh air? Could I what is the break? What is your break that you can use? Could you just do a 5 minute walk? Could you go up and down the stairs 3 times? Could you have a really delicious drink and enjoy that instead? Could you talk to a friend? Could you do a puzzle? Distraction is really important. Is there anyone in your support system that you could actually let know that this is something you're trying to overwhelm and overcome, and that you want them as your support regulator? It might not be that they can be there in the immediate moment, but actually just actually owning this and not feeling bad about it can be really helpful. Maybe it could be that you could create yourself some healthier treats if there's something that you eat always that is tripping you up, and for me, if I open a packet of biscuits and I'm in the wrong mood, before I know it, I can have eaten 10 biscuits easily without even blinking. And I think we're all the same. I talk to lots of people, so I know that I'm not alone with that. So for me, don't have the biscuits in the cupboard. Have something instead that's a healthier fix. Have some really delicious fruit as a treat in the house or something like that. It can be anything. Getting outside, having some fresh air, just clearing that moment. Like you're saying, it's quite an urgent thing that happens, Mega, isn't it? So actually, in that urgent moment, your reflex is to reach for something that is your emotional regulator, generally a food. So in that urgent moment, do something instead. Go outside, take a break the cycle. The minute you break the cycle, it's easier to stop the cycle, isn't it?
Break the cycle, break the pattern. This is what we advise in mental health as well, in terms of, patients are like, even if you can't do something, go and brush your teeth. Do something that's going to change that pattern of just staying there. And I just want to sort of emphasize the point that it sounds all sometimes when you are in that cycle, you can't see the wood for the trees. And it's like you've got two of us saying, oh, do this, do that. And it can just feel like I'm just looking at the chat, and thank you for the people that have shared your stories. I'm really happy that you feel comfortable to do this. I'm really honored that you're sharing your emotions. It can feel really um, difficult to do so. In terms of when we're giving advice here, the first few times, maybe first 10 times, you may fail. But the important thing is that you keep going.
Mm.
If you do find that you emotionally eat again, the next time it happens, you take a moment out and see if we can do something different. And we've got lived examples with both Ruth and myself professionally that these things do work in terms of keep going, keep trying to break the cycle, because at some point it will stick.
Yeah.
Um,
And a
and
failure
it
is a
may
failure. You can reframe that. It's just as a learning,
it's a
it's an
learning.
opportunity for me to learn. Okay, so that thing that happened, that's one of my triggers. Okay, so I know next time that I'm expecting to be in that situation to be prepared. Sometimes we just have to emotionally prepare ourselves, almost put on a cloak so that we can cope in
Absolutely.
these really difficult to cope with situations. I think it does it. We know it's not easy. We absolutely know this isn't easy, but it's about, you know, just finding the triggers, learning when they don't work for you, learning what helps, and just practicing the things that help a little bit more, isn't it?
100%.
Yeah. And this important element, Mega, this is just so important, isn't it? The self-compassion is so important. I'm sure you're more of an expert about this than I am. So do you want to talk a little bit about this?
I mean, I think about that. Yeah. So, I mean, this is the crux of everything. And this is where it starts in terms of, as I said, that guilt and that negative feeling. If we think back to the cycle, it's just going to trigger another episode. And we do find that patients that sort of talk badly about themselves, feel negative about themselves. Most of the time, it's not a decision. It's a subconscious, again, learned behavior that every time this happens, you feel negative and bad about yourself. Or what's the point? It's always going to stay the same. It's too late to change. And then you're back in that cycle again. So, again, talk to yourself like you would a close friend. Sounds easy, it's easier said than done sometimes, but what I find really helpful is writing it down and get patients to write a journal and or talk out loud to themselves. The thoughts you're feeling in your head, say out loud, and you will stop and be like, what are these thoughts? This is not how I would talk to a friend. Progress over perfection. I said this before, and we spoke about this with Ruth. The first, say 10 times even, you may fail. That's fine. The important thing is you go back for the 11th time and see this as a journey. And it takes a while to make new neural collections and make something a habit. So we're going to keep going. We're not going to stop, and we're not going to say that, oh, this is just how it is, because it's not. We've both had experience with patients where we do see patients learn and progress to be better, and being kind to yourself. I think should be the case for everything, but especially with patients who are trying to lose weight and keep the weight off. That is such an emotional topic. I think anything to do with weight and body image and how you feel about yourself, any little mishaps can just take you back. And so it's really important to be kind to yourself, be your own best friend, just to help you stay on track and think of what we're trying to do here. You're trying to improve your health and your mental well-being. So if there's a way that you can do to bring you back, whether that's a sign on the board, post-it note on a mirror, all these things, whatever that works for you. I've got patients that doing, backgrounds on reminders on their phone to send them every day. So find something that works for you, because this is the key of what we're trying to do here.
Yeah, it is. It sounds so simple. We absolutely know it isn't simple. And
Yeah.
I guess we also just wanted, before we finish and close the slides, we wanted to just suggest for some people, this may be something that actually is a significant issue. So we thought it'd be really helpful just to say, okay, so for maybe no one here today, but for other people who watched later, when would you think you might want to talk to somebody professionally about this, Mega? I think this is really important.
So it's important to distinguish that what we're talking about and what we've been talking about is emotional eating. Binge eating disorder, it is a clinical medical diagnosis, and it is a psychiatric mental health condition. And there can be some sort of blurred lines, but it's important to know that emotional eating, what we talked about, is not binge eating disorder. However, with binge eating disorder, there more than always is emotional elements to the eating. So how do we differentiate? What do we need to look out for? In terms of when help is needed, frequent binge episodes. So every so often when you've had a bad day and emotional eating versus something which is becoming more and more frequent. And in terms of, there's no sort of time frame or days or weeks, but if you notice that, hang on, this is becoming something which, rather than the odd stressful day, it's becoming more and more of a pattern, like this is just something that is worrying me now, then that is something that is, I would advise to seek help for. Eating in secret or hiding food, this is really important in terms of patients who are hoarding food, hiding bags of food in cupboards or whatever, keeping food away from whoever may be in the household, planning to eat when partner or friends or whoever may be away, so you know that that's when I'm going to do my emotional eating. That's when I'm going to do it. That is again something to look out for. Extreme guilt or shame after eating. Now, I know I mentioned guilt in the emotional eating cycle. And what is guilt versus extreme guilt? I think that's very subjective, but again, I would put it back on the patient in terms of, there's guilt that you feel, I shouldn't have eaten that. I feel a bit, next time I'll do better. But is it triggering a poor mental health response in you? Is it triggering high anxiety? Is it triggering low mood? Are you extremely shameful that you're, withdrawing from other things or events? You're finding it's really affecting your mental health. This again is something to look out for. Avoiding meals with others. So this is kind of linking to eating in secret, but also you do find that patients with more of an eating disorder would not want to eat in front of others, whether that is, oh, you don't eat much, or whether that is just the sort of feelings around eating in front of others, an obsession with food or weight. You do find that if you're thinking about what you're going to eat, what you didn't eat, what others are eating, which is really important. I'm not eating that, you're eating that, I'm eating that. Or weight. I think, again, we're talking about weight loss, and there's a weight loss service. So you do find that, we're asking you your weight. People do think about their weight when they want to lose weight, but when it becomes an obsession, as you're finding that more days than not, more moments than not, this is what I'm thinking about. That's when you start to think, is this more? Is this a disordered eating pattern? Is this a body image issue? And that starts to become a medical concern. And I would advise you go and speak to your GP to speak about this in more detail.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And that will be probably only a few people, but it's still worth knowing the difference, I think. So that brings us very nicely, thank you, Mega, to the end of our slides. We're going to be coming to your questions now. I can see lots of comments and sharing in the chat box. So thank you so much. I can see that this has hit home with quite a few people. So I think it is a really important topic. It's a very difficult topic, and it's a very difficult topic for us to be talking about and for people to be thinking about, but it's still important, isn't it? So what we have coming up next week, we have a whole webinar just dedicated to your questions next week. So we're not going to be sharing any resources. Well, we will share resources, obviously, if there's anything you need, we'll happily share links and resources, but we're there just purely to take your questions. We've not tried this before, so we're going to give it a go and see how it works. And then we're going to be looking at the impact of stress and how to manage stress, and the impact of stress on weight management is very massive. So we do need to be thinking about how we manage our stress. And then also then thinking on the 23rd of March about sleep, because we know that sleep can be a massive derailer for appetite regulation and for how we eat. So hopefully if they're of interest, you will join us for those. And Julia, if you can share the link, that would be great. I'm going to stop sharing the slides now, and we're going to come to your questions. I don't think we've got hundreds of questions, but do feel free to pop anything you'd like to know more about in the chat box. And I think also we were just going to check in with you to ask you where you are in terms of your weight loss journey before we go into your questions. So we'll quickly find the poll and see if we can. There we go. We should be able to find a poll. So where are you in terms of your weight loss journey? Let's have a look. I've found it now. So let's launch that poll. So you should be able to see that. We're just asking for our own interest so that we know who we're talking to in terms of your weight loss journey. So great. And somebody's asking in the chat box something about hitting their goal, starting to worry about managing to keep the weight off after I reach my target. Will there be any support? Yes, you're very welcome. At the moment, we're going to be incorporating people in that phase of the weight loss maintenance into these webinars. So you're very welcome to come to the webinars, because everything we talk about in the webinars for weight loss is just, if not more important, for weight maintenance. And then we will add in some additional resources depending on what people need. And we're just in the process of creating all of those resources for you. So if there's anything you feel you specifically need, don't hesitate to let us know. We're very keen to make sure we're getting that support right. So looking where we are, so the majority of people who are with us today are midway through. So well done for that motivation and perseverance. Around 35% of you are just starting out. So great, nice that you've found us. Really interested to know what made you come along today. So if you don't mind popping a comment in the chat box, that'd be really nice to know. And around 20% of you, so it's creeping up, 20%, 18 to 20% of you are heading into that maintenance phase. So that's really helpful to know. So thank you for letting us know. So we've had a lot of comments in the chat box. I think we might need to look through there, Mega.
Yeah, I've got a few that
So
I
brilliant. So somebody is asking, saying that they understand that sugar is addictive and the best way is to eliminate it from your diet. I'm happy to talk about that, but is there anything you'd like to say, Mega, first?
I think you'll talk more about from the nutritionist side, but I can just say sugar is addictive. It just from the way it is, the way it works in the brain,
Mm.
the way your body responds to it. There's a reason why you crave sugary foods and sugary sweets when you're feeling a certain way. So you do get dopamine hit, and the sugar itself is addictive, like any other sort of addictive substances. And
Yeah.
trying to sort of cut off cold turkey is obviously never the way. But I'm sure you'll give more sort of from a nutritional advice. But medically, yes, it is.
Yeah, no, completely. I would completely agree with you. I mean, there is information out there that says that sugar is almost as addictive or as addictive for some people as street drugs. So I think that is absolutely important for us to recognize. I think going cold turkey is impossible, very, very difficult, but it's sort of almost like recognizing where that sugar is in your life and what that looks like for you.
Mm.
And if it is something, I think follow something like our core meal plan. Say, if you don't mind sharing that as a resource, that can be a good place to start. And almost putting sugar in, not so much, really have some mindfulness around where that sugar might feature in your day in terms of cutting it down. Many people are putting sugar in their drinks or sugar in their teas and coffees or drinking sodas which are full of sugar. So we're all so different and what we're doing is very different. So is it that I know lots of people who eat bags and bags of sort of jelly sweets, and that's where their sugar is sort of like creeping in without even thinking, gosh, I'm eating all of this sugar. It's only when you look at the label on the food or on the packet that you actually think to yourself, goodness me, so this is 47% sugar. Okay, that might be telling us that perhaps it's not really going to be doing us a huge amount of good and it might be just spiraling that whole dopamine reward cycle. It's really difficult to find, isn't it?
Yeah.
So yeah.
I just want to go to, as I said, I just want to thank everybody in the chat box who's been really open and honest with us. And I'm not that this person mentioned that, at the age of 62, it feels like can't change. It's like I'm going back to learn behaviors. And it says here, have you come across people, patients with very strong emotional eating who have successfully changed, or do they need lots of psychotherapy? I think that's a beautiful um, question. And I think you can just sense the frustration and people. I don't think the age matters, to be honest with you. As we said, most people into their adulthoods have all sorts of learned behaviors from childhood, whether that's emotional regulation, eating, or whatever. Um, I know I speak for Ruth because we've spoken about this topic before. We both have got numerous patients who have successfully managed to identify this and overcome this. Age isn't the issue. Obviously, the longer you do something, the longer it becomes a learned pattern. It can be harder to break those patterns. But this is where we go back to saying, psychotherapy is there for a reason, it's a clinical tool, and whether that's needed, I leave that up to patients and whether it becomes a medical issue versus a learned behavior. But in terms of things that you can do for yourself, as I said, you may fail, but it's important that you go back and break the pattern. And we have both have had successful um, patient journeys. So absolutely, it's possible.
Yeah, and I can see there's a comment right back at the top from somebody who became very unwell from taking a weight loss while they were taking a weight loss medication. They're now, here wanting support with eating in a way that's going to promote weight loss, but know that they have an element of emotional eating going on as well. It is absolutely not easy, but it is doable. And I think recognizing that this is a pattern of behavior is, I think we've said it already, but that recognition that this is such a big part of making a positive step. So many people can't even get to the point where they're actually admitting, recognizing that they may be in this situation themselves. So I think that
Mhm.
recognition is the first thing, and then start just noticing. The first point of this is just noticing, okay, what are my triggers? What's setting me off? And then maybe thinking about the foods that you eat and what you can swap them for. But it is a journey. It isn't going to be an overnight fix. You said it, turn up the 11th time, get it wrong 10 times, turn up the 11th time, turn up the 12th time. I love that. I love
Just to
the fact
say,
that you've
but
just got to
yeah, just
keep on trying.
sorry to interrupt. We've got a question here, which links quite nicely to that point. That someone's asking if you could go over some suggestions and ideas for alternative behaviors again when recognizing emotional eating times, please. I think you mentioned about things that you can do
Yeah,
to
so I
that
think
pattern.
I think in that moment, it is like you were saying, Megha, isn't it? It's like an absolute urge. It's sort of like an overwhelming need that can happen. And I think from speaking to many, many people, the behavior, the reaching for the wrong food or the eating the wrong food can happen very, very quickly. It can be almost instantaneous. You can almost find yourself halfway through that packet of crisps before you've even thought, I need to eat a packet of crisps. So that behavior can be very, very sharp and sudden. So I think move the food that you're going to be leaning on emotionally to somewhere else. You maybe don't even need it in your house, but there may be other people in your house who you buy it for. And then, you have all of that emotional stress of thinking, well, can I not? I can't buy it, not buy it for other people. But you have to really, actually moving your food around in your cupboards can make a huge difference because it puts the break in for you quite easily because it won't be where you expect it to be. So you'll suddenly have that moment of wake up where you can think, okay, do I really want this? And then just do anything. It could be just getting 3 breaths of fresh air can be as helpful just to put that regulation
It's
in it. It's
it's
so
the same
simple.
thing. It's the same thing we advise in terms of mental health and patients suffering with anxiety attacks and really poor mental health in terms of what you can do. The journey and the end goal seems so far away, but it literally is just taking even 5 seconds, as you said, and be like, you know what? I'm gonna go up and down this if you've got steps, go upstairs, downstairs, go walk around the block. I'm gonna go and brush my teeth. I'm gonna do a behavior, and then if I still want to eat this then I will, or then I will think again. And usually you find when there is an emotional hunger, as I said, it's just very instant and there and then. Even those 2 minutes where you're able to break that cycle and be like, right, I'm going to go for a walk around the block. If I still want this, then I'll have it. Usually you find patients tell me that they don't really want it anymore, or they've kind of got a shift in pattern and behavior. So whatever that is for you, identify that. And usually I tell patients when you're feeling, calm and motivated, take a few minutes out, get a journal, write down things that you want to do when this happens. And so I've literally got patients who use post-it notes and put it on the mirrors or on the fridge. And that may sound a bit extreme, but it really does help in terms of getting you back to what you want to do. So it's very personal. Now, these are obviously stories that we're telling, but find what works for you, write it down. The act of writing it down, reading it in your own writing, because you know they're your thoughts and wants, you do find that that really helps patients.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. So somebody is saying really interesting. There's lots of very interesting comments in the chat box which we really need to pick up on. So one of them is that somebody's been on GLP-1s, just lost 5 stone, but been on a weight loss journey for 45 years. So that's a very long time. So thanks for sharing that. I know lots of people actually who are in a very similar place to that. So you're not alone. But actually what's happening for you is we've almost become regimented with food and almost like got an obsession that you have to eat healthfully. So actually then that's almost like the flip side of the coin. And we know that this can happen too. So I think one of the things I would say, I hope I'm not frozen, is that one of the things to think about is that sort of like 80% rule. So actually getting it right 80% of the time is where we want you to try and be. So 20% of the time, 10 to 20% of the time in this situation for you, it's almost about learning to let yourself have those treats because we know one of the issues for people who've been on weight loss journeys who become very, very regimented and sort of like almost just overly obsessed with being super duper healthy is at some point you will lose that. And there is a very strong possibility that you will then, the coin will flip back over and you'll start eating the wrong foods and not have any control over that. That's not necessarily how that's going to be for you, but we know that that can be a pattern that happens. So it's almost like learn to eat some of those treat foods in a sort of manageable way so that they don't become foods you can't have. Because the minute we have those can't have foods, the minute we start craving them even more. So it's really hard, but I think that's something to really work on so that you allow yourself that 10 to 20% of wriggle room where you have something that isn't super duper healthy and is all about the joy, the pleasure, the sociability of enjoying foods with friends. Would you agree with that, Mega? I can see someone here is frozen. I'm hoping it's not me.
I was just going to say, I agree with you in terms of when somebody's been focusing on weight loss, lifestyle change, it's all about could cut everything down, stop this because you want to focus on your weight. But food is there to be enjoyed. And as you said, 80/20 or whatever percentage you want to ascertain it to. We want to take these emotional feelings to bad foods and good foods away.
Yeah,
And we
yeah,
want to
yeah.
look at the nutritional value and how it makes you feel. And a well-rounded person with good mental health and positive attitude around diet is everything in moderation, as we say.
Yeah, and just try and lose that sort of like part where food is so prevalent in your mind that it's your story every day when you wake up in the morning is how are you going to eat, what are you going to eat. So actually, we talked a little about menu planning of the day. So for some people in this situation, just almost having a plan so you know what you're going to eat, so you don't have to keep reminding yourself constantly, okay, what's next? What's my next meal? What's it going to look like? It's almost like it becomes overwhelmingly exhausting, doesn't it? So maybe think about all of the little strategies, just small pieces of jigsaw puzzle can make such a difference. So it's about putting those pieces of the jigsaw puzzle in that make sense to you. We're all different and our jigsaws are going to look different. But we all need to build the puzzle that works for us, don't we? We are puzzles. We just need to understand ourselves, I think. I'm going to change this up slightly because somebody's asking about protein and muscle mass, and that's a really important thing to be talking about in terms of weight management too. And you've asked this question in the chat box. You're taking weight loss medications and you're concerned about maintaining your muscle strength. This is really important. Not able to exercise so much due to health conditions. Should you eat as much protein? Yes, absolutely. The minimum we would recommend is that 1 gram per kilogram of body weight per day. And if you're miles away from that currently, start building it up. So you think about that 30 grams ish, 25 to 30 grams per meal. So each of your meals, think about building your plate, thinking about having that protein on your plate, whether you're a vegetarian or a meat eater, it really is not a problem. The rules apply all the way around. It's slightly more difficult when you're vegetarian to achieve that level of protein, but just make sure it's on your plate. Make sure you've got a quarter of a plate that looks like protein, and then you've got lots of vegetables there too. That fiber can really help in terms of satiety and keeping you feel full as well. So we also could share, Julia, the protein foods sheet so people can understand a little bit more if they're confused about where the protein comes from. Let's share that sheet, just where you find your protein or your good protein sources from, because I think we get confused, don't we? So
Great idea. So just want it, just some positive things. Brilliant. We'll try writing it down. Great idea. Thank you. And I think it is just to emphasize, it's about things where you might seem so simple and so silly, but it's not. It's such a minefield. You can get lost in your head and the noise of all of this, in terms of the sort of
yeah,
emotional eating side of it. So simple things when you're feeling calm, well, write it down, talk out loud to yourself, write a voice note, whatever works for you, and just obviously this will be recorded. So if you feel this is useful and you want to come back to it and listen again
yeah.
to slides, that's a really helpful tip that we can give as well.
Yeah, very much, and also I think we're all human. So actually quite often we need to hear something several times to understand it. So I think, and we're hearing from you, thank you so much for letting us know in the Q&A that this is really hitting home and really relevant to you, to the people who are telling us that. So thank you so much for telling us. Really helpful for us to hear this as well, because we know it's quite an emotional subject. So we don't want to obviously cause people distress, but we also know how important this is. Somebody's asking about rate of weight loss. We love it when you lose weight slowly, even when you're taking a weight loss medication. That is our happy place. And although it might feel a little disconcerting to you, we would really advocate slow, measured weight loss, that you can get the habit of eating that protein, eating those vegetables, enjoying an occasional treat, and just really nailing those foods which are going to be your friends for life if you get them as part of that habit now. So half a kilo to 1 kilo a week, we think is perfect. There are times when we will have accelerated weight loss, and if that's just a short time, that's great. And if it's in the long term, then it's really worth thinking about am I eating enough? Am I able to eat enough? Yeah, absolutely. Somebody's asking about next week and being unable to attend. It's absolutely fine. If you sign up for the webinar, you will get a link to the recording. So please do feel free to sign up, even if you can't come. We're trying to build the number of people who come to the webinars. So please, be really interested to know what made you actually start coming to the webinars, because we need to understand what inspired you to come in the first place. So do let us know. It'd be really helpful for us to realise. Yeah, so thank you. Great. Any questions that we have missed here, Mega? I'm just saying that there. Oh,
Lots of positive comments, which is great. And just so the comment here, really pleased to have listened to this today. Dieting for 40 years, so think I'm an expert. However, the distinction between emotional and real hunger is extremely valuable. And it just goes to show that if you're not told, or if you're not told, because that makes it sound like you should know, but if you don't stop and think about it, why would you know? Why would you know? And something
see,
that's
I
so
mean,
simple.
I've been to lots of slimming clubs in my younger life. It's a nonsense. This is never talked about.
Absolutely.
It isn't. And it took us a couple of years to decide that we needed to bring this to you, because we obviously don't want to cause trauma to our customers, to our patients. We want to be incredibly helpful as much as we possibly can be. And we know this is just such an important subject, and we feel very passionately, as you can tell, that this is something we all need to be thinking about. Is that part of what's tripping us up? We're all human. We're human too. Is that part of our journey? Is it part of your journey? Is it something that actually, if you knew that this is part of your journey, could you do something about? That's all we want for you, really. We want this to be for you.
Empowering, educational, but also just if we can get even one person, but I know more than that from the comments, just to have some self-compassion for yourself and be
Yeah.
like, you know what, this isn't a flaw. This is just how you've learned to deal with things, and as with everything, you can change that and really change your journey.
And oh my goodness, I'm just human. And actually, so many other humans are doing this too. And also, let's put this into perspective. This is the world we live in. Food is very available, treats are very available, processed food, which is very addictive in nature because it's manufactured in a way that just makes us want to and easily eat more. It doesn't come with any level of satiation. It doesn't actually make us feel satisfied, which is why we talk so much about real food, because real food has properties that help produce GLP-1, for example. It feeds those gut microbiome, which really helps to stimulate ap appetite maintenance and management. So working along with real food is really important, and letting go of those processed foods as much as we can, because they aren't going to help us. They're just going to feed into this cycle. So I think it's really helpful to understand all of this, isn't it?
Absolutely. And yeah, just thank you for those who have shared stories and comments. I'm sure other
Very
people have
much
found it
so.
really useful. And what I said the same thing last time is, even if you can go home and talk to one of your friends about this, I'm sure they'll appreciate and will probably have a similar experience. And the more we can talk about it and get the stigma away and get people more aware, I think the better.
Very much so. I think that finishes today's webinar really nicely. So thank you so much, Mega. We're going to get you back again, I hope.
Absolutely.
We loved having you here. So thank you so much for joining us. And Julia, thank you for being here to support us as well. We couldn't do it without you. And to all of you that have joined us today, thank you so much for your honesty, for sharing how you feel, for recognizing perhaps that this is important for you to be thinking about as well. It's really brave and it's really important, and we really value your time and your commitment for being here. So thank you to all of you, and have a great week, and we'll be back next week.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.